Water covers over 80% of our planet in endless oceans. For years, the high seas have served as a conduit for fantastic discoveries. Yet just as often, the seas have also set the stage for tragedy. The late 1930s. Continental Europe finds itself on the brink of war. In London, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain quietly authorizes England's military complex to begin production on machines of war. Among these is the new T-class of sub. Although a small ship, the T-class is faster and designed to operate over long distances.
They were a very formidable fighting vessel. They were the latest vessels of the day. We had top-line craftsmen working on these engines, and Laird's had a tremendous reputation in the Navy of building a good ship.
By the beginning of 1939, the third of the T-class subs nears completion at the Camel Laird shipbuilding yard in Birkenhead, 3 miles from Liverpool. Dubbed the HMS Thetis, she spans 270 feet and displaces 1,575 tons. Command of the ship falls to Lieutenant Commander Guy Bolus. As the ship nears completion, Lieutenant Frederick Woods is in Birkenhead to assist Commander Bolus during preliminary steerage and engine trials. Among the new crew of the Thetis is leading stoker Walter Arnold, who arrives on the naval barracks in Birkenhead with his wife and newborn son, Derek.
Well, my father was a gentleman, very mild-mannered, not demonstrative at all. He was a good engineer. He was a good draftsman. I think he'd been in the Navy for about 12, 15 years. But he'd been in submarines for something in the region of 6 or 7 years.
Others find their time on the Thetis coming to a close, such as Camel Laird engineer-fitter Frank Shaw. By April of 1939, the Thetis has a full crew of 34 men, but the Camel Laird engineers are still an integral part of the ship.
The Navy were running the boat. The civilian engineers were there to operate the machinery, if you wish. But the command of the boat and the navigation was done by the Navy. But technically it hadn't been handed over.
Final diving trials are scheduled for June 1st, following which the Thetis will officially join the Royal Navy's 6th Fleet. June 1st, 1939. Leading seaman John Turner leaves for the dockyard amidst the preparations for his sister's upcoming wedding. The Thetis is scheduled to steam out of Liverpool Bay into the Irish Sea, where it is to submerge, resurface, and dive again to periscope depth, finishing the trial with a test firing of the emergency smoke candle. Officers from other subs under construction join the Thetis crew to get an idea of what they can expect from this new class of submarine. Also joining the Thetis is the official escort ship Grebcock. Aboard are Lieutenant Coltart and Crosby, 2 officers from the submarine Taku.
The captain of the submarine offered any passengers, if they wanted to come off, they could come off then, because they had double the amount of crew. Normally the submarine carries about 56 personnel, but on this particular day there was 103 persons. That included draftsmen, captains of other submarines. They'd all gone out to see how another submarine worked.
Upon reaching open seas, the crew begins their preparations for the initial dive. Working along one another in the engine room are leading stokers T.W. Kenny and Walter Arnold.
He was part of the engine room staff. In other words, he was responsible for the mechanical integrity of the vessel.
Frank Shaw operates the telemotor control panel, which supplies power for mechanical operations for the entire ship. At 2 p.m. sharp, the order is given to dive. Aboard the Grebcock, Coulthard and Crosby hear the hiss of air emanating from the Thetis as her ballast tanks fill with water, but the Thetis remains on the surface. Bolus begins to suspect the forward number 5 and 6 torpedo tubes are not flooded, which would account for the excess buoyancy up front. Lieutenant Woods is dispatched to the torpedo room to investigate. Woods decides to verify that water is already present in the tubes through the use of a test cock valve.
The way that you told if your torpedo bay was flooded is that there was a little valve in the back of the aft door where you would normally place the torpedo in the torpedo bay. And so you'd open that valve, and if it was flooded, a little trickle of water would come out.
Woods opens the test cocks of the number 5 and 6 tubes. No water appears to be present. But what Woods can't possibly know is that the number 5 torpedo's test cock holes have been accidentally painted over during construction, concealing the fact that the tube is flooded. And despite the fact that the bow cap indicator reads closed, it is actually open.
This was the whole problem. These tubes had to be coated with bitumastic paint, and the orifice for the drain cock was blocked with grease and a big pad of cotton wool and grease.
Woods then attempts to open the rear door of the number 5 tube, but finds the latch mechanism is jammed. The men struggle to unlatch the rear door, and before anyone realizes what is happening, water quickly floods the forward compartment. In the forward machinery space, stoker Walter Arnold quickly rushes towards the torpedo room.
When the incident happened, he didn't actually see it, but he could hear the water coming in, and people screaming and shouting and clanging of doors and that sort of thing. So he knew something was a mess.
The bow of the submarine became very heavy, really heavy. And with the submarine driving forward to try and dive with its dive planes in a down position, then it became an uncontrolled dive very quickly.
Bolus quickly orders the main ballast tanks filled with high-pressure air to counteract the diving Thetis, but the effort is fruitless. Unable to close the torpedo tube, Woods and the other men retreat to the first watertight bulkhead door. Stoker Arnold arrives and helps Woods and the others in shutting the bulkhead door against the floodwaters, but it won't shut. One of the fastening clips of the bulkhead door has wedged itself between the door and the coaming of the sub, preventing the door from closing. The men attempt unsuccessfully to move the clip out of the way and secure the door. With precious seconds ticking by, Woods finally gives the order for the men to fall back to the second watertight bulkhead.
When they got to the next bulkhead door, it only had one lever, and with water lapping round the feet and the great pressure of the water against them as it was diving down, they shut that door. And when it shut that door, the whole submarine reverberated because it had landed on the seabed at this time.
The nose of the Thetis buries itself in the soft mud of the seafloor 150 feet below the surface, with its entire front half flooded. Topside, an uneasy feeling grips the men on the Grebcock. Coulthard orders the engines stopped and the Grebcock's anchor weighed in an effort to mark the Thetis's last known location. Yet due to the tide and delays in getting the anchor weighed, the Grebcock drifts a full 4 miles west of where the Thetis actually lies. The Grebcock sends a message to Fort Blockhouse via the receiver station at Seaforth to try and determine the exact details of the Thetis's dive program. Aboard the Thetis, officers devise a scheme to pump out the flooded compartment. But before the pumps will work, the open rear torpedo tube door must first be shut. This requires someone to swim out the forward escape hatch to the front of the sub, into the torpedo tube to shut the rear door and open the 2 mainline suction valves. It is an extremely dangerous maneuver. The first volunteer for the assignment is First Lieutenant Chapman. But halfway through the flooding of the escape chamber, Chapman aborts. Because of their depth, the atmospheric pressure inside the chamber becomes too great for him to withstand. Four more attempts are made with the same result. Thoughts turn to simply evacuating through the ship's escape chambers, but with nightfall approaching, it is not a viable option.
Sending people out in an open sea without any sign of surface support was almost like signing a death warrant. And the water temperature wouldn't have been altogether that warm, so that quite often, it's quite possible they would have died of exposure.
At 6:15, Coulthardt's message regarding the Thetis's dive program finally reaches Fort Blockhouse. The Thetis has been down for 2 hours longer than she was supposed to be. Fearing the worst, all ships in the area are diverted to Thetis's aid. The HMS Brazen, who had been assisting on gunnery trials of another ship in the Irish Sea that day, steams to the Thetis's last known position. By 6:50, 4 fighter planes are dispatched to locate the Thetis. They are successful.
An Anson aircraft overhead spotted the marker buoy, came down low and relayed it to Fort Blockhouse.
The pilot's rough coordinates would put rescue ships within a mile of the Thetis's actual position. But due to an error in calculation, the navigator inadvertently radios in a position that is a full 7 miles south-southwest of the Thetis's actual location. Ships begin to correct their course according to the navigator's coordinates. By the time they reach the incorrect position, night has fallen, and the search is postponed until morning. It doesn't take long for word of the ship's disappearance to make its way around the tiny community of Birkenhead. Concerned friends and relatives of the men aboard begin to assemble outside the Camel Laird yard to await any further word on the fate of the ship.
We used to have to go down and to the gates of Camel Laird's and wait there to see whether there's any news coming through.
Aboard the Thetis, another plan is proposed. By blowing the rear ballast tanks, the submarine's aft end will float up to the surface, thereby getting the escape hatch closer to the surface and reducing the atmospheric pressure. For the plan to work, the aft end of the ship must be lightened, which involves pumping out the ship's rear freshwater and fuel tanks to compensate for the flooded forward compartments. The Camel Laird men must construct a pump system using only existing pipes and whatever they can find aboard the ship. But another problem emerges. Given that the ship has over double her normal complement of men, the oxygen supply on the ship is quickly depleting.
The difference then was 18 hours of air for everyone on board versus 36 hours had it only been the crew.
The men worked tirelessly throughout the night. In the early hours of the morning, the stern of the Thetis begins to rise. Friday, June 2nd, dawns with the stern of the Thetis sticking out of the water. But in the oxygen-depleted atmosphere, Bolus is reluctant to wait until rescue ships arrive and decides to begin evacuating the submarine. The first 2 volunteers are Captain Oram and Lieutenant Woods. Just after 8 a.m., as Woods and Oram are proceeding to the escape chamber, the sound of explosions are heard, alerting Thetis to the presence of rescue ships. Word is passed on to family members waiting at Camel Laird, ending a long night of uncertainty and fueling hopes for a speedy rescue. Within minutes, the Thetis escape chamber is flooded and the outer hatch is opened. A welcome shaft of light shines through the porthole of the escape chamber. The men trapped on board the Thetis begin to feel a wave of optimism that they will once again see the surface.
They were hopeful of a rescue. They weren't in very deep water. Her tail was out of the water. And I can imagine after probably 12 hours they thought, well, rescue must be on the way.
Moments later, Oram and Woods reach the surface and are taken aboard the awaiting Brazen. The first evacuation is a success. Rescue crews signal the Thetis via Morse code to send the rest of the men out. Lieutenant Commander Bolus decides to double the number of men to be put into the escape chamber. One of them is leading stoker T.W. Kenny. But something goes wrong. No indication of an escape is seen through the hatch's tiny porthole. After 15 minutes, Bolus orders the escape hatch drained and opened.
When they drained down and opened up, 4 people came out. 3 of them were drowned and 1 of them was on the point of expiry.
My father did drown, actually, because he drowned in the escape hatch. If they've got the submarine up, my father wouldn't have been alive because he was put in with 4 other men into the escape hatch. When they opened the hatch, he tumbled out dead.
The only survivor utters that the outer escape hatch is jammed before finally losing consciousness. Topside, the crews of the Brazen and the Vigilant are reluctant to draw closer to the Thetis for fear of blocking the men's route to the surface. Although the Thetis is surrounded by 3 ships, including the escort tug Grebcock, they are powerless to assist those on board as precious minutes tick away and oxygen on the Thetis dwindles. Despite the setback, Bolus decides to push ahead with the escape effort.
The captain of the ship then said to my father, "Would you like to have a go?" Well, you can imagine it was a stark choice. There were 4 people who just died. The people who were remaining were in a pretty poor state. And it was a case of, well, should I die trying to get out or should I die just waiting here for someone to rescue me?
Arnold is accompanied by Frank Shaw. As the chamber is prepared, Arnold walks Shaw through the escape procedure.
Frank Shaw, being a civilian, had no idea whatsoever of how the machinery worked and the breathing apparatus. So he had to place himself entirely in my father's hands. When the upper hatch was opened and they were free to go out into the sea, Frank Shaw went through first, but my father noticed that this little valve hadn't been opened.
Arnold grabs for Shaw's relief valve, trying to open it before his lungs burst from depressurization.
But Frank Shaw, of course, didn't know what was happening. He thought he'd been trapped by the foot, so he lashed out, as you would. My father had to sort of contend with him lashing out while he was opening this little valve.
Arnold manages to release Shaw's DSEA valve. Aboard the Brazen, Captain Mills sees Shaw as he reaches the surface. Tense moments pass as he waits for the second man to appear. At last, Stoker Arnold reaches the surface, coughing and gagging following his underwater ordeal. Like Frank Shaw, he is quickly pulled aboard the rescue ship. Realizing that time is running out, Captain Mills orders Wreckmaster Charles Brock to remove one of the rear manholes in an attempt to get air to the men.
Brock scrambled up onto the tail end there, loosened some bolts. A hiss of air came out. He didn't know what was happening. He quickly screwed them down again. He didn't know what damage was doing, what was happening at all.
Before another plan can be formulated, the Thetis begins to sink. At 3:10 p.m. on June 2nd, the Thetis disappears beneath the waves, claiming 99 lives.
At the final inquest, they found the escape hatch open, jammed open. Somebody inside the ship must have got thinking that the men might have been escaped or what, I don't know. But they opened the door and the sea came in.
Back in Birkenhead, news of the Thetis' demise reaches 4-year-old Joyce Turner and her family, moments after the marriage of Joyce's older sister.
What I remember is that nobody would tell me what was going on. Wearing a lovely silk dress, being a bridesmaid, and all that happiness had suddenly changed and gone into everybody crying, and I just didn't know what was going on.
Salvagers dragged the Thetis to shore on September 9, 1939, 3 months after she originally sank. A month later, an official inquiry is held to try and determine the cause. Tests reveal that the bow cap of the number 5 tube opened itself, explaining how the outer cap was opened despite the fact that the indicator had been switched to closed prior to the opening of the tube. As a result, the neutral position is eliminated from all submarine systems. It also sees the implementation of a safety system for the back of torpedo doors.
After that, they invented what was called a Thetis clip. You could start to undo the inside door, and if there's water in, it would force it against this clip, so therefore you couldn't lift it over to open the door fully.
Over 60 years later, echoes of the disaster still linger within the families of the victims.
The whole nation, I think, was shocked because this was the biggest submarine disaster we'd ever known.
There was a lot of shock and surprise that something like that should go wrong. Something so simple.
Yes, it was anger, really, anger. The general feeling was they could have rescued them, they could have got the people out.
There must be no more secrecy when a submarine goes down. The men must come first.